Okay, here we are learning living in new churches in the later parts of the Middle Ages. This will be the last PowerPoint that we have, and then we'll get into the actual project itself later this week. Let's talk about rise of universities. Major changes in Europe. Here are some of the changes that happened. No longer people were worried about survival. I mean, if you remember through the Black Plague and all the, 100 Years' War and all the difficulties and all the fall of Rome and all that. Now people are no longer worried about survival. They start to worry about, not worry, but they want to start living better lives and start increasing, fun times. There's more stable food source. We know that throughout history, when there's a more stable food source, the population gets stronger and the population grows. So cities start to grow as well. With cities growing, you got the revival of trade, not just trade amongst little bitty villages, but now you're going global again like it was in Rome, all the way back to China, etc. Growth of towns with this trade growing, now towns are going to start to grow. So towns start to pop up. You start to see some development of architecture into higher buildings, just like there were in Rome. So there is some revamping of all the ancient ideas as far as cities and growth and trade, etc. The plague is dying down, and I don't mean to be funny about that, but it is. The plague is starting to fade out. People are starting to your immune systems are starting to develop into defeating it. So, and also people start to realize that it may be because of filth and trash and everything else. So they want to start cleaning up. There's a need for education. I mean, if you go back, all these towns and everything growing up, all these different areas, etc. Now there's going to be a need for education because there's going to be so many more smart people, if you want to say that. So this educational need expands. People are, we always talked about, not only do you trade goods, you trade ideas, trade thoughts, all these different things. So education's fixing to, really bloom. Church needs, here's why education expands. The church needs better clergy. They want to have these more intelligent clergy because now people, realize that they can start to learn. So they want to be able to have, more intelligent clergy. Royalty needs education. Some of the younger people need education because the bureaucracy or the government is just growing and becoming more and more difficult to manage. So they need literate men. Literate means that they can read for growing bureaucracies. Also the wealthy, look at that guy, he looks pretty cool. Also the wealthy needs sons. They need their sons to become educated for higher positions in those two different types of government, either the church or the royal governments. So there is this need for education. Need for education, the early universities start to pop up. The original ones were schools that popped up around churches, and they were there to train clergy, right here, just like this picture has over here. They were there to train clergy. Eventually these schools developed into cathedral schools. That's what they were called, but eventually they developed into the first universities, like that one. That's a picture of Cambridge, one of the very first universities in the world. So, people start to realize that there is going to be a need for all these universities. There's a new culture that starts to develop, and it introduces these intellects, if you want to call them intellects. So just like, Leonardo right there, he is an intellect. More people start to have a broader view of the world. They start to develop, fun ideas and start to develop musics and all these different things that more worldly, not just so confined into their little ancient medieval manneralism or their feudalism environment. Now they can start to develop into a worldly manner. Trade, like we said before, develops. So trade's going to develop. Culture starts to develop. Like we said before, not only do you trade goods, you trade ideas. Okay, so you do all those things. Muslims, thanks to the Muslim culture, they saved all the ancient text of the Greeks and the Romans. And once, because once the Crusades ended and all these other wars ended, the 100 Years' War, people started to see that the Muslims saved all these texts and these ancient ideas of all the Rome and everything. So people started to read those things and start to develop into those, develop those kind of ideas into their everyday life. Literature, Latin was the language of scholars and church. Usually the Latin was the language of schools. It's an ancient language. It's a Roman language. It's a difficult language, so what starts to develop, you have something called the vernacular, and that's what starts to appear. Make sure you know what vernacular is. Vernacular is writing in the local languages, learning in the local languages, church in the local languages. So Germans could hear church in Germany, or French could hear church in French, not in ancient Latin. That's a huge idea as well that develops. New church designs, just like this one over here on the right. Technological masterpieces. They were incredible. They're still standing today if you ever get a chance to go to Europe to see some of these. There's new techniques involved, and we'll get into that in a minute. New techniques in building them. They're still there to reflect the glory of God, and they're there to inspire awe in you. I mean, you're supposed to walk into these buildings or step up to these buildings and just be in awe. I mean, something is greater than you. They were funded by merchants and nobles, and don't think that they were funding them because they were just happy to do it. They were funding them to be better with heaven and to get greater good with God. They felt that they could fund it, they would be in better standing once they died and went into heaven. Some of these designs, the first, we're going to talk about two. This is the first one. It's called Romanesque. It's the early church style. It's just like this one on the bottom right over here. Very big, dark, bold, huge stones, huge walls, massive heavy roofs. They needed these huge walls to support these heavy roofs. There was no, it's just basically big giant building blocks. No aesthetics, no, beauty or anything involved. And very small windows, as you can see right there, so not a lot of light in there, very dark inside. Later, they start to develop a second design, and this is called the Gothic. Okay, Gothic is where new technology starts to develop, and these things down here are called the flying buttresses. These two pictures represent flying buttresses, and what this flying buttress does, it takes all the weight from the wall and distributes it outside. So now the walls can be thinner, now the walls can be lighter, and everything else heavier can be outside. And if you look, this opens up the inside, and it creates these beautiful stained glass windows. They're able to have these huge windows, huge stained glasses. Light starts to develop in all these buildings, so it's a beautiful, process once these things start to develop.